Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, July 21st. We begin our cast with the multiple heat warnings that can be seen across much of the country this week. Large swaths of PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and parts of southwestern Ontario and southwestern Quebec have been highlighted by Environment Canada. The agency says temperatures in those flagged regions are expected to reach or surpass 30 degrees Celsius over the next few days. But it warns hot and humid temperatures will linger throughout tomorrow in much of southern Ontario. British Columbia's Public Safety Ministry is also alerting people to be ready for a multi-day heat wave beginning as early as Saturday. Turning to a highly anticipated apology from the head of the Catholic Church on Canadian soil next week. Indigenous people and their ancestors who suffered in residential schools across the country are expecting to hear an apology from the Pope. Thousands of people will travel by bus, plane, and even boat in the coming days to attend events in Edmonton, Quebec City, and Iqaluit during the historic papal visit. Also on the agenda is the restitution of Indigenous and colonial-era artifacts. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says there needs to be a real reckoning at Hockey Canada. The organization continues to deal with the fallout related to its handling of an alleged sexual assault and out-of-court settlement. It also emerged this week that Hockey Canada has been using a fund maintained by membership fees collected across the country to settle sexual assault claims. Mr. Trudeau says the Federation has to do an awful lot to regain the trust of Canadians. Conservative MP Jasraj Singh Hullan is criticizing Ottawa on its commitment to helping Afghans fleeing the Taliban. He says Ottawa has failed to help people who assisted Canada with its military mission in Afghanistan. And now these Afghans are facing reprisals from the ruling Taliban. That's why opposition Conservatives are calling on the government to extend a special immigration program that it set up to bring Afghans trying to flee the Taliban to Canada. This especially for women who are particularly at risk. Ottawa has pledged to welcome 40,000 Afghan refugees, but MP Hullan says they face too many hurdles. One lawyer says colleagues have spent 11 months waiting to hear back from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, which is a delay that he says is unacceptable. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party of Canada will hold a third debate in the contest to become its next leader. Former Quebec Premier Jean Charest had been pressing the party to host a third one, and fellow candidates Scott Aitchison and Roman Baber also wanted a third exchange. However, Pierre Poilievre, the perceived frontrunner, will not take part in the August debate, according to his campaign on Thursday. On the East Coast, Nova Scotia will be seeing a huge investment from Ottawa for renewable energy projects in the province. The government is earmarking $255 million for the initiative. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement today as he began a visit to Atlantic Canada. The money will help the province continue to green its electricity grid. Roughly half of it will go toward new wind energy projects, and the rest will help Nova Scotia Power install batteries to store clean energy. Well, if you make more than $220,000 a year, you'll be able to afford a home in Toronto and Vancouver. Home prices have been going down in cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and Hamilton. But new real estate data from ratehub.ca shows that income needed to buy a home in these markets still remains higher. This is because of stress test rates and rising mortgage rates across all Canadian cities. The annual income to buy a home has jumped by $18,000 on average in just the last 4 months. The Saskatchewan Health Authority says it is preparing for a shortage of epidural catheter kits. The kits are primarily used to manage pain during childbirth and cesarean sections, as well as major abdominal and chest surgeries. The health authority blames the shortage on supply chain issues and says it stretches across North America. On the West Coast, the mayor of Vancouver says it's up to the provincial and federal governments to commit to being partners in a bid to host the 2030 Winter Olympic Games in British Columbia. Kennedy Stewart spoke after city councillors voted in favor of continuing to support the Indigenous-led initiative. 4 host nation chiefs say this is a chance to act on government commitments of reconciliation. The 8-2 vote came despite concerns raised in a staff report on finances and a tight February timeline to submit the bid to the International Olympic Committee. All right, after the break, we'll have a look at inflation and investing with Caldwell Securities. We'll be joined by Brendan Caldwell, the director of Caldwell Securities, after the break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back shortly. Statistics Canada reports that the annual inflation rate for June rose 8.1% compared to a year ago. This marks inflation's hottest pace in nearly 40 years. In addition to high food and gas costs, Canadians experienced a surge in prices for travel-related services. But some economists are predicting Canada's inflation rate may have peaked in June, as gas prices are already on the decline. However, one professional says this uncertain time might present an opportunity for investment. Joining us now to tell us more about this opportunity is Brendan Caldwell, director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima. Before you get started, though, I must correct you. I don't know that travel has gone up, but attempts to travel have. Whether they've been successful or not is a whole other issue. But you had questions.
Fair enough, Brendan. Now, right now, we know inflation, recession, and rising interest rates continue to be on everyone's minds. What are your thoughts on this, Brendan?
With so many. First off, people tend to talk about things about which they can do nothing. So people talk about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. So too with inflation, rising interest rates. And everybody's wondering, what this means or how will this affect? And people talk about things, I guess, to try and relieve the tension. But I do think there's some actual things that people can do when this uncertainty is at its highest, when the tension's at its highest. That tends to be where the opportunities are, or when the opportunities are.
And the major concern here is the big R word, Brendan, recession. But what happens to interest rates if we actually do move into a recession?
Well, it's a funny thing. So I'll try and unpack this in 30 seconds or less. But what the central banks, the Bank of Canada and the US Federal Reserve are actually trying to do is create a recession, or at least create an economic slowdown. Because the theory is if they raise short-term rates to the point where they're now higher than long-term rates and they raise the cost of borrowing, this will slow down the economy such that inflation rates will come down and everything will normalize. And it'll be like the last 20 years have been, where we've seen flatlined inflation, flatlined interest rates, nothing above 2%. Nobody needs to worry. The tricky part, though, is that this is not just like it always was before, in that, as you mentioned in your intro, there's lots of external factors other than a normal national economy overheating that are causing these high prices. So not sure that rising interest rates are actually going to fix it. Nor am I sure it's going to cause a recession. To have a recession, you generally need people to be thrown out of work. And as things stand, at least at the moment, it's pretty hard to find people in our business, in any business. We may be the only two people working, you and me, Nima, because it's so hard to find people to come to do any job.
All right, Brendan. Well, instead of worrying about everything, you've said that this is an opportunity for investment. So how so, Brendan?
Well, again, I think as alluded to, the best time to do something is now. And the absolute best time is when everybody says, definitely not now. Things are too troubling, too worrisome, there's too much of this, there's too much of that. There is always going to be something. That's what the news is for, is to make one anxious, worried about things. But when people are particularly anxious and worried, as they are right now, that is when the opportunities are. The worst time, if there is a worst time to invest, is when everybody's sure it's going to go straight up forever. Because once everybody is sure that everything is fine, it's not going to be fine. So here, you're not, at least now you're not overpaying. Doesn't mean you take everything you have, and it certainly doesn't mean you actually borrow money against your house or anything else. It does not mean you borrow money to invest. But if you have $100,000 to invest $10,000 of it. If you have $10,000 to invest $1,000 of it. Take this opportunity to do a little bit. And whether markets go up or down from this point forward, it'll make it that much easier to do a little bit more.
All right, Brendan, we've got a quick 45 seconds left here, but do you see any relief for investors, for Canadians in general, in terms of these rising prices and inflation?
Well, it actually can be very good for companies because for the last 30 years, literally since I've been in the investment business, you can tell by the gray hair, it's been a little while. Companies have not had the ability to raise prices. The only way to increase margins, the only way to increase profitability is by lowering costs, by technology, by outsourcing. Well, now companies, for the first time in literally the 30 years I've been at this, have the ability to raise prices. So this, in a perverse way, can be actually good for companies that can expand their margins by raising prices. So you've got a situation where stock prices are down, yet the company's ability to raise their prices and raise their margins is actually up. So you may be right, Nima. This might not be a bad time to get started investing.
All right, Brendan, thank you again for another great interview, and we'll see you again next week. Welcome back. Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray is up next. Catherine is the host of The Buck Stops Here, and she joins us now to give us her take on the markets. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing North American markets trade lower today, somewhat mixed, but mostly lower. Energy really the big laggard. This, of course, follows WTI, which is down by about 3.4%. So the stocks are also following the price of WTI lower. We're also watching copper down by about 3% today. A number of items really weighing on sentiment. We do have central bankers tightening once again, specifically the ECB hiking by 50 basis points. That is higher than expected. It was 25 basis points that was anticipated by the market. So continued concerns in terms of the liquidity being taken out of the broader equity markets. Also, we have political uncertainty stemming out of Italy, so weighing on the risk-off sentiment today. And also, of course, we are concerned about hiring freezes. This is some of the commentary that we're hearing out of second quarter conference calls from various CEOs. So a little bit of weighing on the broader equity market sentiment. But we are also hearing from CEOs post the conference calls talking about solid demand for the back half of 2022. Inflation, of course, continues to be a real headwind for many companies across nearly every industry. And we also have a tight labor market and concerns surrounding capacity constraints. So all of that really weighing on the market today. In terms of the economic data that we've been watching, initial jobless claims did come in higher than anticipated, so a bit of a negative there. And the Philly Fed survey came in less than anticipated and really saw a contraction within new orders. So a bit of an economic data point to the downside. In terms of stocks to watch, we're keeping our eyes on Tesla, of course. They did beat the street estimates and came in better than feared. And the stock is moving higher to the tune of 7%. But they are having operational challenges, which we do believe will be somewhat transitory. Management, importantly, did rate 50% volume growth target. So that is helping the stock today. In terms of other earnings to take note of, Las Vegas Sands, as we know, a lot of people are traveling. Demand is up. There's no doubt about that. They did report better than expected earnings, specifically Macau, not as bad as feared. And the stock was also upgraded over at Wells Fargo. So that stock's trading up by about 5% post their earnings. Another area to watch within the marketplace is what's going on with steel. Nucor as well as Steel Dynamics are both up respectively to the tune of about 10%. They did come in better than expected on the Nucor front and STLD as well. We're also keeping our eyes on Philip Morris as well as CSX. Both of those stocks are up by about 4% post their earnings results. As we look at the TSX, it is trading lower. As I mentioned, WTI is down by over 3%. Obviously, the energy sector in Canada has a greater weighting than what we see in the United States, so it certainly is putting a little bit of an impact on the TSX. Inflation is very much in focus. We saw CPI number in Canada of 8.1%. Interestingly, that was less than expected, so there is some thought that perhaps we're seeing some peak inflation, but BOC's Macklem is saying that we are going to continue to see above 7% inflation all year. Many economists do disagree with the view that we could see a soft landing in Canada. That is the view from the BOC. But again, as I mentioned, many economists don't quite agree with that. In terms of earnings results in Canada, one that I would point out, Mullen Group, MTL, that's up 10% post their most recent results, and certainly a stock to watch. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs Sundays in the morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the News Forum Network. All right, well, meanwhile, the outlooks remain unclear for the status of a major natural gas pipeline from Russia to Europe. Natural gas has started flowing again after a 10-day shutdown for maintenance, but the flow through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline remains well short of full capacity. That leaves Europe still facing the prospect of a hard winter and uncertain Russian gas supplies. The European Commission proposed this week that its 27 nations cut their gas use by 15% over the coming months. Turning to a deal struck by Amazon to acquire the primary care organization One Medical. The company announced the move on Thursday in a deal valued at roughly $3.9 billion, which marks another expansion for the retailer into the healthcare services sector. The Seattle-based e-commerce giant said in a statement it will acquire One Medical for $18 per share in an all-cash transaction. Neil Lindsay, the senior vice president of Amazon Health Services, said in a statement that the acquisition is geared at reinventing the healthcare experience, from things like booking an appointment and taking trips to a pharmacy. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at major news and headlines from around the world as Italy's premier resigns and India gets a new president. We'll have these stories and more after the break. The European Central Bank has raised interest rates for the first time in 11 years and by a larger than expected amount. It's joining steps already taken by other major central banks to target high inflation. The ECB raised rates by half a percentage point for the 19 countries using the euro currency. The surprise hike today is expected to be followed by another increase in September. The move raises new questions about whether the rush to make credit more expensive will plunge major economies into recession, all at the cost of easing prices for people spending more on food, fuel, and everything in between. Moving to Italy now, where the president says he has dissolved parliament after Premier Mario Draghi's coalition fell apart. No date was set for a new election, but President Sergio Mattarella said that it must be held within 70 days under Italy's constitution. It comes at a time of economic uncertainty in Italy and Europe, which was brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine. The United States is forcing Mexico into negotiations over what Washington considers as unfair practices in the energy sector. Those practices exclude U.S. and other foreign companies from the Mexican energy sector. This violates the free trade agreement that they signed with Canada. The energy sector is a point of national pride for Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. His attempt to enshrine some of his energy sector goals in the Constitution failed earlier this year. But Mexico's Congress made important changes to law regulating the sector last year that remain in place. Turning to Turkey now, where the foreign minister is rejecting accusations that the Turkish military carried out deadly artillery strikes on tourists in northern Iraq. Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said on Thursday that Turkey was willing to cooperate with Iraqi authorities to shed light on the attack. Artillery shells struck a resort area in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish-run region the previous day. It killed at least 8 people. More than 20 other people were wounded. The Iraqi government convened an emergency national security meeting, summoned Turkey's ambassador to Baghdad, and ordered a pause in sending a new Iraqi ambassador to Ankara. The BBC has publicly apologized to the former nanny to Princes William and Harry. This is over what it says were false and malicious claims that she had an affair with Prince Charles, all while working as his personal assistant in 1995. The claims were made against Alexandra Pettifer. It was part of an attempt by a journalist to obtain an exclusive television interview with Princess Diana. BBC Director General Tim Davie says the corporation has agreed to pay substantial damages. A woman who hails from a minority ethnic community has been chosen as India's new president. On Thursday, Draupadi Murmu became the first president from one of the country's tribes and the second ever female president of India. The votes came from the Indian parliament and state legislators. Ms. Mormo is a leader from India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party and is a member of the Santhal ethnic minority, which is one of the country's largest tribal groups. She will be formally sworn in as the president on Monday. Moving to a global study that finds more than 160 million women don't have access to contraception. Research published in The Lancet looked at over 1,000 surveys about contraception use in reproductive aged women between the years 1970 to 2019. And it showed that 40 million of those 160 million women were between 15 to 24 years old, which is a crucial time for educational and career potential. Researchers suggest the lack of contraception use might be due to the fewer options available to women. This especially in countries where marriage and childbearing are seen as a way to gain socioeconomic status. The monarch butterfly is fluttering closer to extinction. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature has added the butterfly to its endangered list. This is because of its fast dwindling numbers. The group estimates that the population of monarchs in North America has declined between 22% and 72% over 10 years. They are threatened by the loss of habitat and increased use of herbicides and pesticides, as well as climate change. One of Canada's zoos is welcoming its newest member. An endangered red panda cub has been born at the Toronto Zoo. The male cub, born last week, is the third red panda born at the zoo in more than 25 years. He is the first for panda mom Paprika, who arrived at the zoo in November as a potential mate for a red panda named Suva. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.